Hi, and welcome to Strategic IT Planning and Evaluation, ENT 214. My name is David Lambert, and I'm a Senior Business Development Manager for Amazon Web Services on the Cloud Economics team, and I focus specifically on cloud financial management. I'm here today with Jeremy Jackson from ASG. Jeremy, can you quickly introduce yourself?
Hey everyone, Jeremy Jackson, Group CTO at ASG. ASG is a portfolio of 40 software as a service companies. So I've had the pleasure of overseeing about a dozen cloud transformations over the past couple of years, and I'm excited to share some of those learnings with you today.
Thanks so much, Jeremy. So let's talk a little bit about what we're going to cover today. We're going to first focus on how IT strategic planning is changing, and then talk a little bit about continuous IT planning and evaluation. And then sprinkled throughout the presentation, we're going to talk about, or ASG is going to be to talk about some lessons learned that they've had throughout their time as it relates to strategic IT planning and evaluation. So let's get going. Before we begin, I really wanted to focus on some of the questions that we typically hear from customers. So first and foremost, will moving to the cloud be economically beneficial? How can I price out some of my migrations or my application builds in AWS? What tools are available to me to help me forecast my costs? And how do I evaluate my IT investment decisions? And then finally, what have other customers done to plan and evaluate their IT spend? So if you're thinking, you know what, I've heard a couple of these questions before, or I've thought about these questions myself, then I think you're in the right place. So let's dive into the cycle of strategic IT planning. So as you can see, this is a flywheel, starting with plan, moving to forecast, and then going to evaluate. Planning is focusing on how do we think through what we're going to do and what we potentially will move to the cloud. And then forecasting is actually, what is this going to be in the future? How are the price and the costs going to change over a period of time? And how is that going to impact our budget or expenses? And then evaluate is actually, did we make the right decision? Are we doing what's best for our company based on the things that we've outlined as important to us? So let's jump into plan. There are really two different types of workloads that we think about as it relates to planning for cloud workloads. The first is migrating workloads. So actually moving workloads from your data centers to AWS. The second is cloud native workloads. So building out an application within AWS and how to plan for that. And each of these have a little bit of a different nuance to them as it relates to planning. So let's really do a deeper dive into each one of these workloads. So first we're going to talk about our process for planning migrations. First, it starts with data gathering, collecting the right performance and licensing data with Migration Evaluator. So that's things like CPU and memory, and licensing implications as well. Next, we're going to actually analyze that data. And we're going to dive into what does this data tell us and what does it mean as far as the financial components of it? And how do we think about what it's going to cost us to move things to the cloud? And then the bread and butter of this is the business case. So based on the data gathering and based on the analysis, you then have the business case, which really kind of compares overall AWS spend to on-premises and tells you how much am I going to save by moving to AWS. So I mentioned Migration Evaluator as a tool. So this is an excellent tool that accelerates decision-making for migration to AWS at no cost to you. It helps you discover compute and storage inventory without agents. You can determine the most cost-effective path. It gives you insights based on AWS experts. And you can make more informed and sound AWS migration decisions based on this. And even allows you to maximize your Microsoft licenses for even bigger savings as part of your migration. But what does it actually produce? Well, it produces a quick insights form for you, a single kind of page that allows you to really understand what's going on in our data centers today. How much storage do we have? How many virtual machines? How does that relate to the different services that are needed in AWS? And then it gives you some utilization information as well. Peak CPU and memory utilization. But the more important piece is the directional business case. Now this gives you great information on essentially what it will cost you to move to AWS. It even gives you information on idle resources and resources available to right size, as well as zombie resources where potentially you might need to look at things and say, do we even need to move certain resources? So really, Migration Evaluator provides you with what? It provides you with quick insights as well as a directional business case so you can make more informed decisions as you're migrating to the cloud. Next, I want to focus on planning for cloud native workloads. So we have a little bit of a process for this as well. The first thing is describing your technical solution. So this is similar to on-prem because essentially what you're doing is you're describing what is the technical solution that we're developing and what are the components of it. Is it going to be a traditional type 3-tiered architecture? And then if it is, from that point, you can actually go to mapping to AWS services. So say you've identified servers as part of your application layer. That would ultimately map to what? EC2 instances within AWS or Elastic Compute Cloud. Once you've mapped to the service that you're using, you're then actually selecting the AWS resource that you're going to use. So you've decided that it's a virtual machine, it's moving to EC2, and then what do you do from that? You say the EC2 instance, we're going to pick an M5 large general purpose instance type. So from that point, you can then start to build out a high level cost estimate with the tools that we provide you. So let's talk a little bit more about those tools that we provide you. So the first one is the service pricing page. This is publicly available where you can go out and look at particular services that you want to build out as part of your cost estimate, understand real world examples, think about maybe some nuances that could impact costs, and really start to get a high level understanding of what this is going to look like. But one of my favorite tools that you'll get to use as part of this is the AWS pricing calculator. This is publicly available to you and it supports over 110 services and most likely will probably have even more than that by the time that you're hearing this recording. What this does is it allows you to build out a robust analysis of everything that's involved as part of your application build and then estimate the AWS costs around it. And particularly, you can estimate AWS support costs. Then from that, you can actually export it down to CSV and start to manually add it into, say, forecasts and things like that that are going to impact your budget planning cycles. And finally, you can save the estimate for up to 3 years and share it via a public link. Now, I really highly encourage you to take a look at AWS Pricing Calculator after this session. One of my favorite things, though, that you can do in AWS is the proof is in the pudding, right? Actually going out, deploying resources, and understanding what that cost is. So figuring out things like, we want to deploy this EC2 instance, but we're not exactly sure how much it's going to cost. Well, you can deploy it, you can tag it or put it in a particular account, and then you can track that cost and see, is this working for us? Is it the right price? Did we forget any services that are potentially involved in this larger application? And then if you did, you can go and adjust. So you can shut down your resources and restart and change things up a little bit so that you're hitting those costs that you wanted to hit in order for you to be effectively migrating or building your own AWS application natively. So I've covered a little bit about planning, and specifically planning as it relates to migrating workloads as well as building cloud native workloads in AWS. And now Jeremy Jackson is going to talk about what planning has worked for at ASG and some things that they have done well and some things that they're still learning about how to do. Thanks, Jeremy. Take it away.
Thanks, David. One of the examples I'll take you through today is something that I'm sure is near and dear to many of you, and that is moving large enterprise applications from on-prem to the cloud. In our case, we started many months in advance, and we decided to leverage Migration Evaluator to identify like-for-like storage and compute costs. What was surprising for us was just how easy it was to configure and orchestrate, and ultimately the level of detail provided in its report. And before presenting that report to our executive team, what we used Migration Evaluator to do was really to bake 3 different use cases. And we called those cases base case, better case, and best case. Base case was the equivalent to a lift and shift with some marginal savings through enacting savings plans, while better case presented a cloud optimized view, moving from always on, always over provisioned servers to more on-demand resources in different instant classes. Finally, best case represented the IS to PAS migration pathway that many of us are on and drove additional savings through compute optimization and licensing costs. In the end, we were able to get alignment with our board on this project by breaking down the pessimistic and optimistic capital allocation and identifying the impact of free cash flow month over month with this migration. As we shifted into execution, though, we realized we had a problem. Namely, we were trying to eat the elephant whole rather than eating it one bite at a time. So why don't I take you through the next steps we took to improve the planning process. And as David said, AWS Pricing Calculator is a great tool. And for us, we used it to break out the different workloads by customer and by region. Then we identified a thin slice vertical we could start to test our hypothesis around cloud costs, performance, and business continuity. And also, as David said, the proof is in the pudding. So the best way to gain alignment with your team and your executive team is to really show traction on that migration and get a part of that workload in the cloud. Once we successfully did that, we began to migrate additional workloads, lowering the risk profile of the migration and ultimately ensuring success. In summation, AWS Evaluator for us was a great tool to plan full scope migration and break down costs by different use cases. And AWS Pricing Calculator can be an excellent addition to stair-step migration planning and break down workloads even further. Back to you, David.
Thanks so much, Jeremy. So now we're going to talk a little bit about forecasting, using native AWS tools and processes to accurately forecast your AWS spend. Really, we think about forecasting in two different ways. First is trend-based forecasts, and this is typically what you would do from a finance standpoint, is looking at your historical data and then building things in that you know are happening, such as application migrations or application feature adds that you know are going to increase your costs, or potentially things that you know that are going to decrease your costs. And then from that point, you trend out everything and forecast that. And then there's driver-based forecasts. Think of this as kind of like manufacturing-based forecasting, in that you're producing a specific widget, and you know that the more of a specific widget that you produce, the more that your costs are going to change or increase. So it's the same type of concept, but with driver-based forecasts, it actually leads to sometimes even better accuracy than trend-based forecasts. So let's talk a little bit more in detail about both of these. First is trend-based forecasting. The great thing about trend-based forecasting is that we give you a tool, Cost Explorer, that allows you to do some of this. Based on machine learning and historical data, Cost Explorer can extrapolate out a forecast, either a 3-month forecast or a 12-month forecast, depending on if you want to do a daily or a monthly forecast. It gives you an 80% prediction interval, and you can forecast by any AWS Cost Explorer filter value. And based on this, you can actually pull down some of this data and then start to add in your own adjustments to it, whether it's seasonality in retail or potentially an increase or an influx in customers that are going to come in at a certain time. You can add that in, and so you know what, our costs are going to go up at this point in time. And then that's how you build out kind of a trend-based forecast. So now we're going to talk a little bit about driver-based forecasts. And this is a little bit more complex than trend-based forecasts, but it can lead to some really great accuracy. So first and foremost, what does AWS provide to you? We provide you with the cost of AWS services, things like EC2 costs and EBS volume cost, and things like RDS costs. We also provide you with the usage of services, so a cost per gigabyte or potentially a cost per EC2 hour. And then finally, we give you cost grouping mechanisms like cost categories or cost allocation tags or even accounts. But then from that point, you have to provide something in order to get to that driver-based forecast. So first and foremost, business levers. What decisions are you potentially making that could adjust and change the trajectory of AWS spend? Is there an acquiring of a company? Are you rolling out a new product, et cetera, et cetera? And then business-specific KPIs, making sure that you're doing, that you've identified the things that matter to you as a company and that you're driving towards those. And then also optimizations. Although AWS provides you with a lot of different tools that allow you to see what optimizations are available, you as the customer have to pull the trigger on actually optimizing what you have out there. And then finally, the last piece and the most important piece is the application of unit costs. So you have all of this information. You have the cost as it relates to certain services, and you have business levers and business-specific KPIs outlined. So now you actually have to apply a unit cost in order to get to that driver. So think about it as in the insurance industry, you might care about a cost per claim submitted. So you know what claims are coming in, you know what IT, you know what infrastructure and AWS spend is related to that claim that's coming in. And what can you do based on that? You can do simple arithmetic and get to a cost per claim. And then you can start to predict, we know when these months there's more claims that come in and our AWS spend could go up. And we know that these months have less claims that are submitted and our AWS spend should go down. So based on that, you can build out a better and a more effective driver-based forecast moving forward. So what have we talked about so far? We've talked about planning and we've talked about forecasting. With planning, we talked about different types of workload, migrating workloads, as well as cloud native workloads as well. And with forecasting, we've talked about two different things, trend-based forecasting and driver-based forecasting. Now, Jeremy is going to talk a little bit about what they've done at ASG as it relates to forecasting and what's worked well for them. Thanks, Jeremy.
Thanks, David. Now, our unique challenge at ASG is forecasting not only traditional trend lines through organic growth, but growth through M&A as well. When it comes to trend-based forecasting, we typically compare historical spend on cloud workloads to future spend. And this usually takes the form of looking at historical AWS bills month over month and tracking it in line with the projected revenue growth. Our challenge comes when we try to do this across multiple workloads. For that, we've begun to find great success using AWS organizations. Once we acquire a company, we put that AWS account ID under a single AWS organization. And then we're able to use AWS Enterprise Billing Console to track spend and use Trusted Advisor to review and adjust the trend lines over time. This allows us to forecast 5+ workloads worth of spend over many months and get more accurate trend line for the entire vertical. But let me share what we're doing in addition to this typical forecasting. We've improved our forecasting process by putting the power in the hands of our team. We do this by having them enable Trusted Advisor and by tuning threshold alerting in their billing console. Ultimately, it comes down to the old adage, you can't measure what you can't see. So we make sure each of our teams has the ability to measure providing budget to actuals on a monthly basis, and we help them improve trend lines by chipping away at Trusted Advisor recommendations every quarter. Back to you, David.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jeremy. So now we're moving on to what I think is the most important part of this flywheel, actually evaluating if you made the right decision or not. So let's dive right in. So really there's two different ways that we look at this. First, you have to define what matters to you. You have to define a KPI, key performance indicator, and make sure that you understand what's important to us. Because if you don't understand what's important to you, you won't be able to effectively evaluate if you made the right decision on building an application or moving an application to a cloud in a certain way. Next is actually picking a cost reporting tool. So I love the quote that you can't measure what you can't see. And it's so true in cloud. You have to make sure you have some sort of tool that allows you to see what you're spending and then ultimately apply that to the key performance indicators that you've outlined. So let's talk a little bit about key performance indicators. So there's a lot of different key performance indicators that you can pick, but I wanted to outline at least 3 today. And honestly, it doesn't matter which ones you pick, it's what matters for your company. So picking the right one that matters for your company. The first one is IT spend per employee. So making sure that you're looking at, how much are we actually spending per employee? How much are we spending on IT? Are we giving our employees the right IT they need and access to the right infrastructure in order to be innovative and create new things? Next is hosting COGS as a percent of revenue, and then R&D as a percent of revenue as well. And hosting COGS as a percent of revenue, you can think about, how much are we spending on hosting our applications within AWS, and how does that relate to revenue? So really starting to tie that out to margins. And then R&D as a percent of revenue is critical because you want to know how much are we spending on creating new things and tinkering with new things and trying to be innovative and create the next big thing. That's super important to make sure that you're looking at that as it relates to revenue. And what you can do is actually start to change that a little bit if it's a little bit too high or a little bit too low. Jeremy is going to talk about that in a little bit more as well. So next is actually selecting a cost reporting tool. So selecting the cost visibility tool that works for you and your stakeholders. First is AWS Cost Explorer. AWS Cost Explorer is the free console-based data visualization tool that comes natively out of the box, available to you to run reports, build out different graphs and different reports to analyze and look at your spend. It's graphs of AWS cost and usage, and it's consistent with cost and usage reports. Next is build your own. So building your own dashboard with native tools and AWS services. You can custom filter your views to make sure they line up with products or applications. You can create multi-graph dashboards, which what allows you to see different things in different ways. You can create optimization dashboards that will tell you, yeah, this is what you need to do in order to optimize. These are some things that decisions that you could make to reduce your cost. And you can even pull in customized KPIs for yourself and start to build around those and make sure that you're hitting those KPIs with AWS spend. And finally, you can continue to do ongoing customization based on what's needed for your company. And then lastly, we have an awesome AWS partner network, and there's tons of great cloud financial management tools out there and competency partners that can allow you to build out pre-configured tools that support your cloud financial management needs. So a lot of this you'll be able to pull down, and it will hit most of your needs just out of the box. They're great tools, and highly recommend reaching out to our partner network. So now we've talked a little bit about planning and forecasting and evaluating, and I really want to focus now on establishing that control to achieve value. So you know what you need to do as far as picking a key performance indicator that works for you. You picked a cost reporting and visibility tool, but you want to provide some additional control and alerts to let you know, are we doing well on certain things or not? So enter AWS Budgets. AWS Budgets allows you to create custom budgets on projects, on services, on applications or tags, and things like that, so that you can look at, are we actually staying within the budget that we set for ourselves? And you can do this daily, monthly, quarterly, and annually, and it provides you that granularity that you're looking for. Additionally, you can get alerted to let you know, hey, you might be going over your budget this month, or you're on track to hit your budget. It's looking good. So AWS Budgets is a great tool to use in order to build out some muscle around governance and ensuring that you're controlling your spend and achieving value through that. So what have we talked about all together? We've talked about planning. Planning starts with two different types of workloads, migrating workloads, as well as cloud native workloads. And then we talked about forecasting, and we focused on trend-based forecasting, and then we focused on driver-based forecasting. And then from that point, we jumped into evaluating, making sure that you made the right decision for your company based on all of the decisions that you've made, the workloads that you've migrated or built, and ensuring that, we made the right decision for us and it's going to work out. So now we're going to hear Jeremy Jackson talk a little bit about what's worked for them at ASG and how they've evaluated some of their AWS spend. Jeremy, take it away.
Thanks, David. So David shared some metrics around TCO earlier on, but for us, the real metric that matters is ROI, return on investment. And we get at that by turning subjective improvers into objective results. Our challenge is companies joining our portfolio in are completely different states of tech maturity and cloud adoption. And often that means it's hard to tell how much value these cloud transformations are going to drive. For us, we found the best tool to do that actually is AWS's well-architected framework. We use that as an opportunity to baseline companies when they first join the portfolio and then re-baseline them after they execute their cloud transformation. This allows us to understand industry best practices across operational efficiency, performance, security, reliability, and cost savings. All of this ultimately improves the outcome and the value that we're hoping to drive. But as I'm sure you've seen, we don't stop there. One thing we do in addition to this is we try to build our own dashboards and baseline each of our companies against the portfolio. And in that, we look at several additional metrics: R&D as a percentage of revenue, hosting COGS as a percentage of revenue, and a tech maturity score based on that well-architected framework. For us, what we consider good in the industry is hosting COGS between 3 and 7%, R&D between 15 and 25%, and a tech maturity score above 70%. Whenever we see companies hit this evaluation criteria, they ultimately go on to be successful. And if you want to be successful in your role, consider deploying some of these frameworks in planning, forecasting, and evaluating your cloud transformations. Thank you, David.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Jeremy. So before you go, let's rehash it one more time. We've learned a little bit about planning for workloads, two different types, both migrating workloads as well as cloud native workloads. We've talked about forecasting, trend-based forecasts and driver-based forecasts, and we've talked about evaluating, so picking the right KPI and then picking the right cost visibility and reporting tool, which allows you to report out on those KPIs. And also a little bit about AWS budgets and the way that that can give you some control to achieve even more value. So before you go, I want to leave you with two things: connect and learn. The first is Peer Connect. So making sure you're connecting with your cloud financial management peers and actually talking to people who are doing this every day. We meet monthly, and it's great candid conversation on what's working well and maybe what's not working so well. The next is the CFM kiosk. Come and talk to us. We're there all week in the expo hall, and we love this stuff. We love talking about cloud financial management. We love talking about strategic IT planning and evaluation. And then finally, the CFM blog. Go and subscribe to it. Read some articles. And if you have any questions, always feel free to reach out to us. We love having conversations with customers about this. And then next, learn. So go and actually look at some of these recordings that we have out there. 8 ways to control and manage AWS costs. That allows you to dive a little more deeper into the cost reporting tools that I talked about and some other things that allow you to control and manage your AWS costs. Like, for instance, AWS budgets. And then quantifying and maximizing your cloud business value. This really ties back to key performance indicators and making sure that you've tied out that value that you're looking to try to get to as you're moving to the cloud or building in the cloud. And then improving your cost visibility and allocation. This one is near and dear to my heart as a previous customer, and I think it's one of the most important things that you can do to visualize your costs in the right way and allocate it to the people that are using it. So go ahead and check that one out as well. And then finally, cost control and governance at scale. So how do you do all of this at a very broad scale? So go out and take a look at those and also connect with us. Thanks so much, and I hope that you enjoyed Strategic IT Planning and Evaluation.